The last day of death row. Inmate Tommy Lynn Sells. What Texas hid from the public. Hi everyone. What happens when a man who claimed to be the embodiment of evil meets the end he never feared? On April 3, 2014, Texas executed one of America's most chilling drifters, Tommy Lynn Sells. Known as the coast-to-coast killer, Sells left a trail of horror that spanned decades, with over 20 confirmed victims and dozens more suspected. But what made his final 24 hours so disturbing wasn't just the crimes that brought him to death row. It was how eerily calm he remained as the clock ticked down. No final words of apology, no visible fear, and almost, a last-minute legal twist that could have changed everything. This is the story of a man with no remorse, a justice system tested to the last second, and a haunting reminder that evil doesn't always scream. It watches, waits, and sometimes quietly slips away. Stay with us as we uncover the final hours of Tommy Lynn Sells. Dear friends, as the sun dipped below the horizon on April 2, 2014, the Texas State Penitentiary at Huntsville prepared for another execution. Inside the prison walls, Tommy Lynn Sells sat quietly, pushing aside a tray of meatloaf, green beans, mashed potatoes, and cornbread. It was 6 p.m., the moment that officially marked the beginning of his final 24 hours. Texas had abolished last meal requests years prior, so there were no special indulgences, just a standard prison dinner. But Sells ate every bite, no hesitation, no sign of nerves. Just a man seemingly at peace, or perhaps just a man devoid of anything resembling empathy. Tommy Lynn Sells had lived on death row for over a decade, and in that time, prison staff described him as calm and reserved. But calm isn't always what it seems. Psychologists and survivors alike had another word for him: psychopathic. Sells had long been labeled a textbook example of antisocial personality disorder, a man who lacked guilt, remorse, or conscience. To those who knew his crimes, the lack of emotion wasn't peaceful. It was terrifying. Back in 1999, a 10-year-old girl named Crystal Surlis would forever change the course of this case. She survived a horrific attack by Sells and became one of the few people to look him in the eye and live. Her bravery in court helped seal his fate. But Crystal wasn't his only victim. Sells claimed responsibility for as many as 70 killings, and authorities officially linked him to 22. His crimes were as random as they were brutal. Men, women, and children alike, attacked in different states using different methods. No pattern. No mercy. He was dubbed the coast-to-coast killer because his carnage stretched across the country, from Texas to Illinois, California to Florida. Sells had no job, no home, and no plan. He hitchhiked, rode trains, broke into homes, and lived off chaos. He once admitted he craved the adrenaline. "I'm just after that rush," he told investigators. "I don't have an on and off switch." And that's what made him so dangerous. He was completely unpredictable. As April 2nd faded into the early hours of April 3rd, prison staff noted. Sells showed no distress. He had spent the previous 3 days speaking to unnamed visitors. Who they were, the state never revealed. Perhaps they were spiritual advisors. Perhaps not. But Sells, as usual, seemed unmoved. He slept well. There were no outbursts, no signs of fear, only routine. But outside his cell, a storm was brewing. Just 1 day before his scheduled execution, Sells' legal team filed a federal complaint, not to overturn the sentence, but to challenge the method. They questioned the drug Texas planned to use for lethal injection. Due to pharmaceutical restrictions, especially from European companies, many states had turned to unregulated compounding pharmacies for execution drugs. The origin of the drug Texas intended to use on Sells was kept secret. Officials claimed they had to protect the supplier, but to the defense, secrecy wasn't just troubling, it was unconstitutional. On April 2nd, a federal judge in Houston issued a stunning ruling, a temporary halt to the execution. The state was ordered to disclose more about the drugs they planned to use. It was a rare win on death row, and for a moment, it looked like Tommy Lynn Sells might avoid execution, at least temporarily. But it didn't last. Less than 2 hours later, the Texas Attorney General's office filed an emergency appeal. The state took the case to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals in New Orleans. Their argument, speculation about the drug's source, wasn't enough to justify a delay. And just hours later, the court agreed. The stay was lifted. The execution was back on. Still, Sells didn't react. He slept through the night and awoke early on April 3rd to a simple breakfast of pancakes, oatmeal, and applesauce. He ate everything. Then, he packed his few possessions, a couple of letters, photographs, prison-issued clothes. They'd be held for a while, though no one expected anyone to claim them. By mid-morning, the final steps were underway. Protests gathered outside the prison, small but vocal. Inside, the warden and execution team ran through their checklists. The intravenous lines were flushed, the sound system tested, the sedatives prepared. But Sells' lawyers had one final move, a last-minute emergency appeal to the United States Supreme Court. It was a long shot. They argued that without knowing who manufactured the drugs, their client faced a risk of cruel and unusual punishment. The court took hours to respond. Then, just a few words. Application for stay of execution denied. No explanation, no further discussion. Now there was nothing left to stand in the way. Shortly after 6 p.m., Tommy Lynn Sells was escorted to the execution chamber. He showed no resistance. When asked for final words, he said just one. No. No apology. No last-minute confessions. Just silence. At 6:14 p.m., the lethal injection began. The drug cocktail worked quickly. Sells closed his eyes. Witnesses described him snoring briefly. Then stillness. At 6:27 p.m., he was pronounced dead. Outside, victim families expressed a mixture of relief and pain. "We've all suffered so many years," said one grandfather. "It's payback time." Others didn't care whether Sells suffered in his final moments. To them, his death, no matter how peaceful, was still more merciful than the ends he gave his victims. For the legal teams involved, the execution raised serious questions about transparency, ethics, and constitutional rights. But for those who remembered the lives destroyed by Sells, the questions were simpler. Why did he live so long? And why did his end come so quietly? In the end, Tommy Lynn Sells remained what he always was, a drifter, a man with no roots, no remorse, and no redemption. His death brought an end to one of the darkest chapters in American criminal history. But the scars he left behind will never fully heal. His victims are still remembered, and justice, while delayed, finally arrived. As the execution chamber fell silent, Tommy Lynn Sells took his final breath, a peaceful end for a man whose life was defined by violence and chaos. Outside, families of his victims felt relief, but little closure. How could they, when the damage he inflicted would haunt them forever? The courts wrestled with ethics, transparency, and constitutional rights. Yet the grim truth remained unchanged. Justice delayed is justice denied. Sells spent years manipulating the system, even at the end, portraying himself as the victim. But today, the curtain finally fell. His story is a chilling reminder of how deeply human evil can run, and how urgently justice must act to protect the innocent. As his name fades from headlines, the lives he destroyed must never be forgotten. Their stories are the ones worth remembering, not the monster who took them. After all, justice isn't only measured by punishment, but by how we remember those left behind.